everyone. We've been talking about time, reality, the nature of the soul, and really came to the conclusion that we can't go much further until we define what the soul is. Because, as we've already discussed, we're not one thing, we're made up of all manner of parts. And this is something which was recognised by our ancestors. These days we talk about the soul, we talk about spirit, we talk about mind, psyche, as if all of these things were interchangeable. Our ancestors had a far more complex division of the whole body, mind, soul complex. They knew we were made up of all manner of different parts with different functions. And this kind of goes towards explaining why people can be so inconsistent sometimes, why we change our minds, why we shift our moods. It's all tied up in the fact that we're a composite of several parts. And we're going to go on to look at things such as what happens to the soul, but we can't do that till we know what it is. We could use one of several models. The Norse peoples had a very clear and wonderful soul model, and to be honest, it's probably my favourite one and the one I feel most comfortable with. You can find breakdowns of that model in the books of Edward Thorson, particularly Rune Law and the 9 Doors of Midgard. If you look at Don Webb's writings on Egyptian thought and philosophy and mysticism and magic, you'll find they too broke down the soul into distinct parts, and these are listed in his books, such as The 7 Faces of Darkness and onwards. But the one I'm going to talk about and use as our model is one that I've written about quite extensively myself, and that was the old Celtic model. We find the names used for different parts of the soul in some of the old Celtic tales and so on, and from these we can reconstruct a composite diagram of the soul, and you'll find this illustrated in my Book of Ogham. And when I say illustrated, I mean properly illustrated. You see here these overlapping circles which show the way that the various parts of the soul interrelate. We can break down in the Celtic system 8 main parts of the soul, and in all of these systems, one point in which they differ significantly from our thoughts of the soul today is that the body itself is considered to be part of the soul. There's no real distinction seen between the incorporeal parts of the self and the corporeal parts. They're all part of who we are, and this is a really significant difference. But the body is not the first part. There's something which underlies the body, and this is what you call the appearance or the shape. This is the thing which defines who we are, how we appear, how we project ourselves to other people, how we shape ourselves as a whole. And it's this which determines the appearance of the body. The body itself and the elements which make up the body are the second part of the soul, taking their form, their template, their pattern and their shape from the appearance. Now, the body is made up of 6 elements. the breath, the respiratory process, the air we take in, which oxygenates the blood and keeps the body going, the mind, the brain, the thinking faculties, the face. This is again the way that we appear and look to other people. The blood, the flesh, the bone. These all go into the body, and these are all shaped by the appearance. Now, the appearance might sound a quite, what's the word, simplistic term, but it's not just the way we look. It's the inner qualities which determine the way we look. It's the personal patterns and signatures which underlie the way we look. It's not just a case of saying, oh yes, I recognise that person from a photograph. It's the qualities that make a person look the way they do. It's an outer reflection of an inner thing, the manifestation of a pattern. We have the appearance, we have the elements which make up the body. The third thing then is the animating principle, or the vital breath. This of course is different from the respiratory process. It's the breath of life itself, the vital principle, the thing which animates us and makes us alive, the difference between living matter and unliving matter. If you've ever been present when someone dies, you'll know this by experience. There is a world of difference between a living body and a dead body. Something has gone. It's not simply a case that a person has stopped breathing, that blood has stopped flowing. Something has gone. And that is the animating principle, the vital breath which filled that body with life. When the body is alive, it can house the mind and the will. These are not just thoughts, it's not just the physical brain. That was included in the elements which made up the body. This is the thinking and learning principle. It's that which enables us to experience things, to learn from experience, to favour one thing over another thing, to choose, to have will, to be able to judge, to exercise discernment. And as we do these things, it creates an equal and complementary part of the soul, the memory, which stores the experiences, which begins to recognise the patterns in them, to categorise them, to analyse, to project new experiences based on ongoing patterns. These two aspects between them, the mind and the will and the memory, give us the ability to live, to learn, to experience. It's the whole of the experience of human life, really. We then ask the question, who experiences? Who is it who has these experiences? Who is it who thinks these thoughts? Who has this will and acts upon it? Who sifts through these memories? This is the fame, the self, the very core of individuality. That part of us which thinks, I am I, and which recognises the self as being a separate thing, distinct from everything else. And we recognise that this spark of self, this innermost part of us, is not our thoughts, is not our experiences, is not our memories nor our emotions. These are the things that it experiences. It defines them, rather than the other way around. But that's not where it ends either. There is also the shadow or the shape-shifting aspect. Because not only do we have an appearance, we have the ability with skill to project a different experience, a different appearance. If you watch a really good actor, you'll know what I'm talking about. Because you may see that person in 3 or 4 different films and struggle to recognise them in each one. Because they completely change the aspect that they're presenting to us. They take on a new persona. They look different. They sound different. Their voice may be the same, but their speech patterns aren't. They move differently. Their walk, their motions, their nervous tics, it's all different. And this is the shape-shifting aspect. It's a part of the soul which is most used now by actors and performers, but in days gone by was a mainstay of magicians and sorcerers. It underlies tales of such beings as werewolves and vampires and so on. It doesn't necessarily need to be a literal transformation, but a change of aspect and of behavioural patterns which completely transform the person. And there's the shade, or what we might call the soul, or some would recognise it. The shade is different from the self. The shade is something which represents the accumulated life and experience and relationships of this current life. When we depart this life, the shade is what remains of that life. It may account for ghost phenomena. And it's that part of us, I guess, which most people are thinking of when they talk along such terms as passing on or going to heaven or similar. But you can see we have a multiplicity of different parts of the self here. And when physical life ends, it's not as simple as the body dies and the soul goes on or reincarnates. This is far too simplistic a notion for such a complex being. And as we look at these models from cultures which are far older and yet more sophisticated in their philosophy than our current one, we find that we have to think a lot harder about what becomes of the parts of the soul upon death. And that's what we're going to do next time. Because it's a lot more complex and more clear and less clear cut than people today think. when you start looking at a model of the self at this kind of level of complexity. And I really have only just scratched the surface of it for a brief video like this. It's something, if you want to know more about it, you will really have to read up on it and go into it in detail, because a small video series like this can't do it justice. I've simply listed the parts, but there's hours of exploratory thought in there. So we will be pursuing the matter further next time by trying to look at the death and after death process, as it would seem if a model of this kind is accurate. And although there are different names used and slightly different arrangements, the other models I mentioned, such as the Norse one or the Egyptian one, they are very similar in their aspects. So this is not a one-off model that the Celts had. It's a complexity of thought about self and the soul and the nature of life, which was quite common throughout the ancient world. And it's the simplifying of religious concepts and the imposition of belief which has really led us to the poverty level of self-understanding that is so prevalent today. We see here that we are not our thoughts, we are not our memories. These are things we accumulate and which we use to gain experience, which in itself is not us. The sense of self is a thing in itself, surrounded by all of these other facets, the whole of which come together to make the person. So we'll go on next time to look at what happens to a person when that person dies. What happens to all of these parts? Because something must happen to them all. As I say, really this model perceives no real difference between body and soul. They're aspects of the same thing, of our life. And Einstein would have us believe that matter can't be created or destroyed, it can only change form. All of these aspects will change form, will do their thing, will transform, take on new shape and new being. And we will explore that and discover in what way would this happen according to such a model of the soul. So until then, take care, and I'll speak to you again soon.